Good afternoon. Hopefully you can hear me now. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to RosieCon Book Festival. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Diane Rogers, and I am the school librarian at Ben Davis Ninth Grade Center in Indianapolis, Indiana. I am also the founding member of RosieCon Book Festival. I'm so excited that you decided to join us today for our festival's first author panel for the 2021-2022 school year. RosieCon chooses which books and authors to invite to the festival based upon the titles each year that are on the Elliott Rosewater, Indiana High School book list. All authors and illustrators for the 25 titles are invited to participate. For various reasons, mostly scheduling conflicts, it isn't always possible for all invitees to attend. So you know, the Rosewater list is a recommended reading list of contemporary titles for teens in the state of Indiana. This list is renewed and refreshed every year with new and exciting books and is sponsored by the Indiana Library Federation. Near the end of each school year, teens from across the state vote for their favorite book, and the winning title is given the Rosewater Award. Voting is online and is currently open, so go to rosiebookaward.com, click on current list, and then click on voting. Voting is open every year through the first week of May. Before I give the mic and camera over to the authors and the moderator, let me take a second to thank our sponsors of this festival. Money and support has been provided by the Lilly Endowment for the Arts, the Indianapolis Foundation Library Fund, and Wayne Township Schools. Thank you to the sponsors. Finally, enough of me talking. Let's get to the panel, How to Mend a Broken Heart. I want to introduce our moderator for today, Julia Reynolds. She is the media specialist at Greenwood High School in Greenwood, Indiana. Julia is also the former chair of the Elliott Rosewater Book Committee, and I know how much she loves hosting authors at her school and talking with them about books. Welcome, Julia, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Diane. And I am just tickled pink to be here this afternoon speaking with our two authors. Like Diane said, I'm a media specialist on the south side of Indianapolis, and you can find me on Instagram at Stylish in the Stacks. But we are not here to talk about me, so let's jump into our authors. Let's go alphabetically. We will start with Kathleen Glasgow. Her book, How to Make Friends with the Dark, is on our Rosie list this year. So welcome, Kathleen.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Sure. Go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about your other books. I know you and Laura both have books that were recently published.
That's right. My first book was Girl in Pieces, which came out a couple of years ago. My second book, which I'll be talking about today, is How to Make Friends with the Dark. And my third book, You'd Be Home Now, came out last week, and it's about a girl whose brother has recently returned from rehab, and she is struggling to help him.
Well, we're really happy to have you here today. And we also have Laura Sibson. We will be talking about her book, The Art of Breaking Things. Welcome, Laura.
Hey, everyone. So happy to be here and to see you all. Well, not literally. Like Kathleen, I have the book we'll be talking about today, which is The Art of Breaking Things. You can see it over my shoulder. And then just in August, Edie in Between came out. And that was a pivot for me. That is contemporary fantasy, whereas The Art of Breaking Things is very much contemporary realistic. But I feel like both books, and I think my brand in general, is like girls trying to claim their space and find who they are and speak their truth.
And I think you did that very well. So a couple of housekeeping items. If our viewers today would like to submit some live questions, you can do that. If you are watching on Zoom, you can submit a question through the Q&A button. And if you are watching on YouTube, you can submit your questions through the comments. And we encourage you to do that. For viewers who were with us last year, you may notice a few differences in how we run our panels this year. You'll see that our panels are smaller, and that is intentional. That is because we wanted to be able to ask authors specific questions about the books on the Rosie list, because we hope that you're reading along with us this year. So as you're thinking of questions to ask the author, you are welcome to ask questions that are general, or you can ask specific questions about the books, and that is what I will be doing as well. So let's jump on in. So today's panel is called How to Mend a Broken Heart. And I think we can all agree that the two books we're talking about today cover some heavy topics, right? We have sexual abuse, we have substance abuse, we have grief, we have messy families. And I sure do not want to summarize your books in front of you, so I'm going to let you do that. So Kathleen, we'll start with you. Could you just summarize How to Make Friends with the Dark for those viewers who haven't read it yet?
How to Make Friends with the Dark is about 16-year-old Tiger Tolliver, whose mother dies suddenly, and they have been each other's whole lives. Tiger has never met her father. She learns that he is in prison, and she's briefly placed in the foster care system before an older half-sister that she didn't know existed comes to take care of her. So it's very much about the grief process, finding family, finding your place in the world, and learning how to deal with when the universe messes everything up for you.
Yeah. And Laura, could you tell us a little bit about The Art of Breaking Things?
The Art of Breaking Things is about sisters and secrets and the healing power of art. It's about 17-year-old Sky, who is a budding young artist, a senior in high school. But when her mother's ex-boyfriend returns to their lives, she needs to grapple with the sexual assault that happened at his hands when she was much younger. And so through the course of the story, she's struggling with how to speak that truth, while also worrying that her little sister could meet the same fate.
I read both of your books recently, and there were some interesting similarities between the two. Like you mentioned, Sky has a sister, and so we learn Tiger does as well. They also have complicated relationships with their moms. They have confusing relationships with boys. So I think it'll be interesting to pair the two today as we're talking about them. I heard a quote years ago at a conference from author John Green. He said that books are not just about escaping your lives, they are also about exploring your lives. And that is something that I have shared with my students for years since. And I feel like your books do exactly that. They help us explore what is going on in the real world or within our own lives. So I guess my first question is, was that your intent when you were writing this? Were you hoping that readers would explore their lives through the heaviness of the topics of the books? Laura, let's start with you.
That's a really interesting question. When I started writing this book, it was truly just for me. To be frank, I wanted to explore a situation that occurred in my own life when I was 12 years old. And for me, I understand things best by writing about them. And so it started out to be just something for me. And then it became something all of its own. Sky is a fictional character. She's not me. And so I guess there was a pivot point where I don't know that I wanted readers specifically to explore their own lives so much as I wanted readers to be seen. I wanted them to feel like if they've gone through a similar situation, I see them and I understand to the extent that it's possible. And if they haven't gone through a similar situation, to grow empathy for someone who might.
Kathleen, how about you?
So I wrote How to Make Friends with the Dark because my mother and my sister both passed away. And so I was dealing with a lot, and I'm an adult now, whatever that means. And so I have some tools in my mental toolbox to deal with grief. But while I was thinking about this and going through this process, I kept thinking about, what if this had happened to me when I was younger and I didn't have any tools or people around me that could support me? And it, like Laura, I write from personal experiences and fictionalize them and give them to teenage characters because I like the adolescent life of exploration. And I found through talking to students at class visits after Girl in Pieces came out that they often don't know how to articulate what they're feeling. They don't have a vocabulary for their emotions. Some do, but a lot don't. And a lot of them are afraid to talk about what's going on with them mental health wise. And so a book can be the place where you can explore that rough stuff safely without anyone knowing what you're doing, because it's your book. And it's a place where you can learn that language. If you need to, in real life, say, this is happening to me, this is how I feel. And in the case of How to Make Friends with the Dark, it's really about articulating your grief. And I wanted to be honest in the book too, for kids, that it doesn't go away. You learn to live with it. It becomes a part of like your very soul. And that's okay. Like that is a life experience that you have. So
yeah, and that's incredible, that the power of storytelling, that you're able to explore something within your own lives, but then connect with readers as well. And I think that's what we love so much about stories. We've actually, unfortunately, seen an increase this past year with book challenges. I know that we have seen that in Indiana. It's crazy to me that in 2021, we're talking about censorship at times. But we have seen book challenges because people are concerned about what they call inappropriate content. And I think most librarians would say that these books reflect reality and can often show resilience and hope within a struggle. We had a panel last year with Lori Hall Sanderson, and she said to write less than the truth would be dishonest. So since these two books obviously deal with some heavy issues, how do you respond when you hear about books getting challenged, or people wanting to take books off shelves because they feel like teens aren't ready for them, or it's too inappropriate or dangerous for kids to read about? Kathleen, how do you feel?
I feel that if you're saying that a book is inappropriate for a teenager to read, then I'll ask you what your thoughts are on that teen's mother dying. Is that inappropriate? Or is it inappropriate for that teen to grieve? Girl in Pieces is about self-harm. If you tell a kid they can't read a book because that subject matter is inappropriate, you're erasing their life if they are living that subject. You are telling them that they are inappropriate, that their experience is not valued or recognized or respected, and you're not going to nurture it. So when you ban books for kids and teens, you are erasing an essential emotional experience that they need to be having in order to learn how to live in the world. And I find it, frankly, despicable, to be quite honest. You're erasing their entire existence. And I don't think you care about kids when you ban books.
Laura?
Do you know those signs in front of churches where they put the letters on them? I saw one once years ago that said, "Don't prepare the path for the child, prepare the child for the path." And I think that when parents try to ban books or challenge books, it's coming from a place of fear, because they are worried about their child being exposed to something that they feel is somehow dangerous or harmful. But in fact, books like ours prepare the child for the path. Books like ours, as Kathleen said, are a safe way to explore difficult subjects. There's no evidence that books like ours are going to lead teens toward dangerous behavior. And in fact, the emails I received from teens were the opposite. My book offered girls who'd experienced sexual assault hope that they could experience healthy relationships after such a thing had happened, and so I want to keep writing what I write and, hope that it'll find the readership that it needs to find.
And I think too, after writing How to Make Friends with the Dark, which does deal with the kids who are in foster care, I met kids in person at events, and they wrote to me, they emailed me saying, I haven't read a book yet that had a kid in foster care, and I'm in foster care. And I didn't see that. And you talked about that so nicely, because I've had good families and I've had not great experiences, and I haven't seen myself in a book yet. And that's why Laura and I do this. Mm-hmm. It's tremendously important to find a book where you say, oh my gosh, that's me. Like you remember reading books when you were younger, and the ones that you loved so much because you're like, that's me. And that's why we do what we do, because we want kids to have that experience with our books and any book, like find yourself inside.
I had a young woman approach me at a book festival last weekend who'd already read Edie, and she wanted to share with me that she was comforted by the depiction of grief. My story, Kathleen, is also about a teen girl who's lost her mom. And there is magic and they are witches, but there's also grief. And for her, it was a comfort to see grief addressed in a teen novel. She didn't feel that it's always addressed in a way that's been helpful to her.
You guys just answer these questions so beautifully. I really loved listening to both of those answers, because that is something that we get challenged with so often. So I really appreciated hearing your responses. We did have a question submitted earlier last week for Laura. This is from Lily. So kind of going along this same vein, she said, how did you approach writing the chapters that tackled harder subjects like sexual assault? And were they more difficult to write opposed to the other chapters? And I'm going to add on to that question a little bit, because what I found so fascinating in both of your books is, yes, they're heavy, but they were also a bit of a page turner for me. And I didn't find myself dreading picking them up. I really was invested in the stories. So how do you balance writing about sexual assault and writing about grief, and yet keep your reader invested and not overwhelmed? So we'll start with you, Laura.
So when my editor bought the book, so for those of you who haven't read it yet, and I won't give away spoilers, the story is interspersed with flashbacks from Skye's childhood that include what had happened to her. And so when the editor had first bought the book, the flashbacks were very different. And her observation was that they weren't working to improve the pace of the story. And so I did need to go back and rewrite many of those. And to Lily's specific question, they were hard. They were really hard to write, and they were even harder to rewrite, to really consider the most painful experiences of this character's life and to try to be as authentic as I could be to those moments, while also, writing, and that was a 12-year-old perspective versus her 17-year-old perspective. It was challenging, but I know that by reworking them and placing them in different spots in the story, completely changed the way that the reader experienced the narrative flow. And I absolutely feel that it's a better book because of it. I have a fabulous editor. I trust her suggestions.
They're so important, right?
Yeah.
How about you, Kathleen?
I don't know, because my books are overwhelming in a sense, because they're so emotionally oriented around a specific overwhelming event. I just try as hard as I can to get you to move to the next page in the next chapter. And maybe part of that is remembering that when these really complicated things are happening, real life doesn't stop around you. And so that provides like a base for the main plot. Your mother died, but also this boy broke your heart. So you're going to call him up in the middle of the night and yell at him, like stuff like that. And so I think that for me as a writer, that probably provides like the page turning aspect and a little levity to the story.
Do you find yourself having maybe different habits when you write certain parts of stories? Do you find yourself listening to music when you're writing more difficult scenes, or is there a certain preparation that you kind of go through to kind of build yourself up for some of those writes and rewrites? Kathleen, how about you?
Okay, every time I tell people this process, so you're just going to think that I'm very weird.
Oh, so, now I'm really excited to hear it.
So I started out life thinking I was going to be a poet, which is probably why my books read the way they do. And I am a pantser, which means that I think about an idea for a really long time in my head, and I make notes. I don't outline and I don't plot. I think about an idea. A character comes to me, and then I just start writing, and I don't stop. I don't make chapter breaks. I don't do anything like that until I get to 300 pages. I don't listen to music when I write. I have a little desk in the corner of the living room, and I have the TV on really low so I don't feel lonely, but I actually cannot start physically writing at the laptop until I have found a song that embodies my main character. And sometimes that takes a couple of months, and I don't go searching for it. It's usually a song I hear on accident. And then I will listen to that song 4 or 5 times every day before I start my writing for that day. So
I love that.
The song for How to Make Friends with the Dark was Harry Styles' song about the mother who dies. And now like that title is like completely escaping me. And the song for Girl in Pieces was Camera by Wilco. And for You'd Be Home Now, it was Let You Down by NF. And so that's my bizarre process. And I don't know, maybe Laura is, a plotter, but I just can't do that because I like to be free and see what happens. And there might be characters that creep up that I had no idea were like lurking in my subconscious. And then I can clean things up. And then, your editor will always say, when you get to that point, maybe take out that thing happened with the house fire. That was you just really going off the rails. And I'm like, oh, you're right. So.
No, I love that. I think that's great.
I love hearing other writers' processes. I really do. I was just yesterday talking with a writer, and I was lamenting that I'm not a plotter. I would like so much to be a plotter. I have the sense that my writing life would be easier if I were a plotter. But I think, in fact, that at this stage, it's time to just accept that I'm a pantser and I cannot be cured. I find that I don't change what I'm doing so much scene to scene as I do book to book. Yeah. So for The Art of Breaking Things, I had a really angry alternative rock playlist that I would just put these headphones in and that would be on repeat. It was really loud and angry. And that's what I needed. But when I was drafting Edie, I was listening to like jazz and very like muted sounds. And that's not necessarily a muted book, but it was just the sound that I needed. And the book I'm drafting now, I'm actually just listening to like coffee house noises. Maybe because I miss writing in coffee houses, which is how I used to get all my work done. And now I'm in this very quiet office in my house. And so I've been just listening to ambient noise. But I wouldn't say that I changed sort of what I was listening to depending on the scene that I was writing. It was more just like the writing session itself and what I needed in that moment.
Yeah.
And when I was doing How to Make Friends with the Dark, and I was really thinking about exploring like that minute by minute process of grief, like everything that has to happen. And midway through the book, I like to make it easier on myself. I decided to separate it into, it happens day by day, and the chapters are the days like day 30. I'm never going to do that again. It's really hard for me. And as a writer, I just want to also say, I don't like chapters. Like I like the way Girl in Pieces was, where it was just 3 parts and that's it. And I prefer that structure. Like having to do stylistically a chapter break really, it ruins my flow. Not to get all like artsy about it, but I do think that, like Laura said, like the book itself determines the structure and how you write it. Like it will tell you how it needs to be written at a certain point, and you have to go back and pay attention and do it, even if you don't like it. As the writer, you're like, well, this book needs it, and so here's what I'm going to do.
I love that. And I think whatever you're doing, it's working, because both of your books were incredible. So keep on that path. Speaking of kind of letting the book choose the style or the form it takes, both of your books are in first person point of view. Was that the way it was from the very beginning, or how did you make that conscious decision to speak from those girls' perspectives? Kathleen, how about you?
I love first person. I think that for me, it works really well because I feel like I can get into the character and really explore what they're going through. I do like third person in some sense. If you're writing a short story, that seems easier to me in that format. But How to Make Friends with the Dark it's in first person, and I made the decision very early on that because of the amount of grief that she was experiencing and the emotional intensity of it, that she was going to probably disassociate. And so that's why there are second person chapters throughout the book where those moments overwhelm her, and the only way that she can think about them as to see herself from the outside or speak directly to herself. And so she goes into second person,
Mhm. Yep.
which is it's a very tricky thing to try to do, but I hope that I pulled it off.
Absolutely. Laura, how about you?
I lost the thread of the question. I was so focused on Kathleen talking
It's
about,
okay.
first person.
Point of view.
I felt like books I tried to write before The Art of Breaking Things, I was doing third. And then when I started doing The Art of Breaking Things, it was first from the get-go. And that really cracked something open for me in terms of connecting with my characters and feeling like I was really hearing them through the drafting process. And so Edie is also first person present tense as well.
I actually found myself finding a lot of lines in your books that I was jotting down, just because even though it was the character speaking about themselves, it just felt very relatable as a human. Like Kathleen, I wrote down when Tiger says, "I have lived through more than I ever thought possible in 2 months and come out the other side. It feels scary, but it feels doable." And I just found that very relatable. And I think a lot of readers would be able to find that relatable. Even though it's her speaking to herself. So I really appreciated the first person point of view. We do have a question in the Q&A block here. And I know you guys have both mentioned editors. So Charlotte asks, could you each please tell us about your path to publication? Did you get agents, etc.? Everyone's story tends to be different in how they get published. So Laura, how hard was it for you, or was it pretty easy?
It was really hard. So the first thing I should share with y'all is that I had a whole career in higher ed before this. I was a career counselor at different universities in the Philadelphia area. And so it wasn't until my early 40s that I started to write, though I'd wanted to write for a long time. And I just wasn't sure that I had a good idea or that I was a good enough writer. There was a lot of, to be frank, there was a lot of fear holding me back. Not to say I didn't have a completely fulfilling career, because I did. But once I hit my early 40s, I found some space in my life to explore the writing again. And I guess I sort of gave myself permission. And then after I completed my first manuscript, I realized I had no idea how to write a book. I have a business undergrad and then a counseling degree. So I went to BCFA, which is Vermont College of Fine Arts, to get an MFA. You do not need an MFA to write or publish a book at all. I wanted to do that to try to improve as quickly as I could. And I think the most huge benefit to me from that was the sense of community that I built, the writers that I met who are still beta readers and good friends to me today. But it still took another 5 years before I got an agent. And The Art of Breaking Things is my third completed manuscript, and that doesn't count the manuscripts that I didn't complete. When I started querying for an agent, which is when you write letters to try to get an agent interested in your work, it took me over a year, and I think I had 47 rejections before I finally got a yes from my agent, number 48. And I'm still with her. She brokered a 2-book deal for me. So here we are.
That's great. So keep going is kind of the theme.
Yeah, I mean,
keep
definitely.
going,
You have to keep going. You can't give up on yourself. There's so much rejection out there in the world that you cannot give up on yourself. You can't be the one that says no to yourself, right? You have to be the one who's continuing to move forward, trying to get better and reaching out to people, to try to get that support that you need.
I love that. You can't be the one to say no to yourself. Like, let the other people say no, but you don't say no to yourself. I really like that. Kathleen, how about you?
So I always wanted to be a writer from, a very young age. Like that was my thing. Like books were my thing. And then when I decided I wanted to be a writer, that was my thing. I was always going to write. It doesn't matter. I always wrote. It's what took me through some difficult times. And I think it's important to say that you're not a writer just because a book comes out and is on a shelf. You are a writer if you write. Mm-hmm. If anyone out there is writing something, you and me and Laura, we are the same. we were all writers together, and we could sit down and talk about writing and what you're working on. We are the same. If it's your thing, keep doing it. You don't have to write every day if you can't. Stories will build in your head, poems will build. If you're a musician, your lyrics are going to build, your melody is going to build. You will find the time and you'll do it. I had no idea about the book publishing process. I just started writing Girl in Pieces because people said, you should write a memoir about what happened to you. And I said, no one wants to read that. But I decided to fictionalize it, but I had no idea how to go about doing any of it. Probably because when I went to school, I studied poetry, and poets are supposed to be poor and struggling all the time. And they don't really, they don't expect anything from you. So you don't get like visits from literary agents or discussions about the publishing business. So I had no idea. I had an agent that I met at a literary conference because I thought, well, I have a book now, I'll go, I guess. This is what people seem to be doing on the internet. I don't know. And that was my first agent because I had no idea how to get an agent. And she was like, I love this, let me represent you. And I had no idea. I was with that person for 3 years, but nothing much was happening. There was a lot of revision. And there are a lot of things about the writing business that I don't like to think about because I can't deal with them in a decent way. But we parted ways amicably. And then I asked my friend who writes adult novels, and she said, well, you need to just go find another agent. And what books do you like? And look in the acknowledgements and find out if who that author's agent is, because maybe they would like your book. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, honestly, because I had no expectations because I had no idea what was going on. I was not on social media. I didn't have a writing group or a community. I just queried agents, and Laura talking about that process is what happens, where you send them basically what would you hope would be the jacket flap copy to your book. That's the query. And you hope to get them interested. And I sent out like 70 emails, and I got some no's, and then I didn't get answers from a lot of them. And then there was this one email from this woman who sent me a 4-page email with notes and comments on Girl in Pieces and everything that they loved about it and the things that they thought that they needed work. And she absolutely understood Charlie and got Charlie's story of self-harm. Also, she was very funny when we had a phone call, and that was, I don't know if that should be the thing you're looking for in an agent, but it is for me. I need somebody who's funny and understands my worldview and understands the way I write. And she championed the book, and she sent it out like right away. And 4 days later, we had offers. So my story is not like a usual one. I was very lucky. And it wasn't a painful process for me because, like I said, I had no idea like the struggles I just felt lucky, the struggles that can happen and how writers keep trying. And all you can do, honestly, is keep trying. And like your teachers tell you, keep your eyes on your own work and don't worry about how successful somebody else seems to be, or, okay, people are rejecting me, or even my agent doesn't like my new manuscript. Just keep going, because you know what? Writing is your thing. Like it is for me. It's always going to be your thing, whether it's on a shelf or not. So just keep doing it.
And I think writers start writing because they love to write, not because they love the business side of it, so I think you're not expected to know how that all works. You have to rely on the people to do their job. Okay, we have more questions coming in. Krista took a question I was going to ask towards the end, but we're going to ask it anyway right now. What would your characters say about how you can mend a broken heart, both from love and loss? Our title for this panel is, how do you mend a broken heart? And what would Sky and Tiger say to that? Who wants to tackle that one first? Yeah. I know Tiger goes to a grief group. I think also, Kathleen, in your book, it's interesting that we see characters that look really messy at first, but maybe they're not as complicated as we try to make them out to. So what would you say for Tiger?
I think Tiger in the end would tell you to wear your broken heart proudly, because it's a part of your soul now, and it's going to make you who you are for the rest of your life, and not to be ashamed of that broken heart, and not be afraid to show people your stitched up broken heart, because you'll find the people who understand what it's like to live that way.
Is that the symbolism behind her wearing the dress through most of the book?
Yes, and a lot of guilt. So for me, after my mother and sister died, you feel weird things, like guilty things, like I didn't call them, or when we were 10, I had a fight with my sister about such and such a thing. And you're like, why is that happening? And Tiger has a fight with her mother over the dress that her mother bought her without her permission for a dance. And it is not the dress that a 16-year-old girl would like to wear to her first school dance. Thank you very much. And then as an act of contrition, she wears that dress for the next 68 days straight on. I don't know if that's a way of honoring her mother or not, but it's something that she had to do to climb into this piece of fabric that was the last thing her mother touched. So wear it proudly, I say. Wear your broken heart proudly.
I feel like Skye would be similar in ways. When the story opens, she's coping in unhealthy ways. She's drinking a lot. She's hooking up with guys, not in a healthy way, but because it numbs her, and she doesn't see herself as worthy of any connection that's more valuable than that. And then through the course of the story, she starts to realize her own worth, and ultimately she, creates this mosaic out of broken things. And so I think she also would have the same perspective as Tiger in terms of being, I don't know if proud is the right word, but owning the brokenness and not feeling shame about it. It was really important to me in this story that the character overcame a sense of shame. It is so frustrating and sad to me that people who are abused end up feeling shame rather than the abusers who committed the act. And I want, if nothing else, for people to read this book and feel that they no longer need to hold on to that shame. They can share what has happened. Brene Brown says that the best way to debilitate shame is to air it out in the open, to share it with another person. And I think that's the way that Skye begins to own what happened to her and move forward. And that's how she would suggest that you mend your own broken heart as well.
I think that, we write for younger people, Laura, and I truly never like it when people say kids are resilient, they'll bounce back, because they don't. They absolutely do not. They need help every step of the way through whatever trauma they're going through. And, books like these can help them. And I think it's okay for books to tell kids it's okay to feel broken. It's okay. It's okay to have this fundamental experience that you're having and not be ashamed of it, and to wear it and show it to people and talk to people about it, because there are a lot of other people out there who are just like you, going through the same thing, and they're afraid to talk about it too.
Laura, you mentioned Skye making a mosaic, and we haven't really mentioned yet, but art plays a big role in your book. She not only makes the mosaic, but she does post-it art and a variety of different mediums. And I wrote down a quote from your book as well, which says, "What happened to me is permanent, and using my art might be the only way to communicate my truth." When did you decide to make art a prevalent part of this book and kind of a coping mechanism for Skye?
She came to me as a budding young artist, so she was an artist right from the get-go. But I would say she wasn't using her art in such a big way, or I hadn't written that into the story until my editor had observed that this was a big part of her that wasn't necessarily on the page, especially in the last third of the book. And so she asked me to really lean into that and think about the ways that the art could represent Sky's growing sense that she could take up space in the world. Mm-hmm. And so, she starts with these little charcoal sketches. And then, like you're saying, she moves on to things that are a little more public and are a little bigger. And so that was my way, or Sky's way, to like slowly show the reader, how she was coming into herself, even though she wasn't still quite ready to speak her truth until, toward the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was really interesting to see other characters' reactions to her art. She was so proud of that posted art, but then Sal from the diner, thought it was, someone basically graffitiing his building, so that was really interesting to see kind of the different reactions. Kind of going along these same topic here, Charlotte asked, about revisions of your books. Did you have to revise these very much, based off of agent or editor comments? Is there anything that you miss from having in the books? It's always interesting to kind of hear those behind the scenes of what didn't make it in the book.
I don't remember needing to cut anything I super missed. I mostly needed to, as I was saying earlier, like rejigger the pace, mm-hmm. and then really amp up the art. I needed to also make my secondary characters more three-dimensional. And that really paid off because, this is my first book that's ever been published, right? And so working with the editor and who guided me toward that process helped me realize that every little thing you do impacts another thing, right, Kathleen? So like by making my secondary characters more well-rounded, it actually also impacted the main character because she's interacting with them. And so then the whole thing has more resonance, which is like a miracle to me.
Yeah. Let me jump in here really fast because I had written down, both of you had like secondary characters that, well, I'll just name them off. So I'm thinking of Mac and Judy in your book, Laura, and I'm thinking of Cake's parents, Kathleen. Both of them were, minor characters, but yet we have these moments with both of them where we see them very uncomfortable with what's happening. Mac and Judy are at dinner with Sky's family, and they're very uncomfortable about the, passive aggressive attitude and the things that are being said. Cake's parents are feeling very conflicted about how their daughter is getting involved with Tiger's life. And I just found that brought so much to the story because, we were seeing so much of our main characters, but to also see how it affected those side characters was really interesting too. So I agree that really brought like a 3D-ness to those characters. So bravo. I just wanted to get that in there because I really liked those little scenes with those side characters. But Kathleen, did you revise a lot from your book?
So I think that Laura will really appreciate this story. So after Girl in Pieces came out, and it's a very heavy book, and so, don't go read your reviews on Goodreads, but you can if you want, if you're resilient enough to. But everyone was like, oh, I love this book, but it's so sad. Oh, it's so sad, or it's very overwhelming. And I had a second book due, and I was working on How to Make Friends with the Dark, and I had turned in a draft of it to my editor, and she really liked it. And I thought, well, everyone is too sad reading Girl in Pieces. I shouldn't make this book that sad. So I rewrote the entire book and made it like lighter and more philosophical and changed Tiger's voice while my editor was on an exotic vacation in Brazil. And then I sent it to her, and then she called me on the phone and she said, Kathleen, what did you do? And I said, well, everyone, Girl in Pieces, people are like sobbing. I don't want to be a sobbing author, do I? And she said, put it all back right now. Put it all back. This is what you do. This is what you're good at. It's what I love. You go very dark and truthful. Put it all back right now and never do this again. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I did. And I appreciate that support. So sometimes there's a big thing like that. And sometimes there are other things where your editor will say, and your agent reads your book before they send it to your editor or before they send it on sub, and they have notes because they like to make it as perfect as they can. But then when you get an actual editor, they will have a lot to say to you. Sometimes it's a 20-page edit letter, all single spaced. Sometimes it's just 5 with like notes and big picture things first, and then they'll attack the tiny things. So with How to Make Friends with the Dark, it was sometimes she would tell me Tiger is being actually way too interior here, and I need her to have some action and to move around, because sometimes I will forget about plot while I'm describing things, and your editor knows what to tell you. And when you have a great editor, you love them because they understand how you write and what you're doing and what you're trying to do, and they help you get to that spot. I will never rewrite a book while my editor is on vacation again.
At least not with that editor. She won't let you do that. Speaking kind of on behalf of the educator readers, I think we typically look at the educators that are in the books and kind of see, okay, are these good educators or bad? And I wanted to mention, Laura, Mr. M, because I found him to be a really interesting character. He's Sky's art teacher, and he knows her. She feels safe with him. She feels comfortable, but he's not easy on her. And I found that really interesting. When he sees that she's making bad decisions or he's frustrated with her, he lets her know, and he kind of holds her accountable. And I appreciated that, because I think those are the types of teachers we want to have, or we want to be. We want our students to feel safe, or we want to feel safe with our teachers, but we also don't want to just let everything go by the wayside too. So did you have a teacher like Mr. M, or is that the kind of teacher you wanted? What kind of inspired him?
Mr. M is directly inspired by an art teacher I had in high school. He had this big mustache, like a push broom mustache, and the students just loved him. But I did definitely fictionalize him in terms of where he's hard on Sky. I never experienced that with him. I wasn't Sky.
Yeah.
But I really wanted that for her, because, things are hard at home. And while her mom is on her about some things, her mom is also very much absent in the important things. And I wanted to depict an adult and an educator who was witnessing Sky and saw her and wasn't going to just let her slide, fall through the cracks the way other folks may have, allowed to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you want your readers to view Sky's mom?
That's tough.
Right.
So frankly, in the first version, she was even worse.
Okay.
So in the final version, I'm hoping that the reader is frustrated with her, but doesn't necessarily despise her.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, it was a revelation for me in writing that book to realize the mother is the antagonist in this story. When I started writing it, I assumed that the abuser was the antagonist, but in fact, the mother is the one in the way of what Sky needs, which is to have her truth spoken, and the mother is in denial. And so she is the antagonist. And so I needed to paint her in a way that she really was that role. But I hope that you also have a sense that she is a person, a fully formed person who is struggling in her own ways, and, made bad judgment calls, but also is a human being that made mistakes.
No, I think you did that. My assistant and I talked about her quite a bit, and, gosh, she'd make us so angry, but yet she's a human. And so there was so much conversation about that. Krista is asking, this is an interesting one. What kind of advice would you give to someone who wants to read more, but doesn't have a ton of time? And I can imagine as a writer, you're probably wanting to read. I mean, you probably enjoy that on your own time, but I would imagine you always have writing in the back of your mind too. So how do you make the time to read, Kathleen?
Well, you have to turn things off. I think like if you're turn off social media, turn your phone off, and just dive into a book. But everyone is really busy. And I love this question because it gets to one of my favorite things about being a reader, is that listening to audiobooks is reading.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can listen to audiobooks while you're cleaning. You can listen to them even while you're doing your math homework, because it's just like music.
Yeah.
You can listen to them while you're walking the dog, on the bus to school, on the bus to work. Audiobooks are reading. Some people, they intake reading in different ways and better ways, and audiobooks work better for them than flipping a page and sitting down. Listen to audiobooks. If you don't have time, just put it in your buds and listen to that book, because that's reading too.
And the readers are so good. I mean, audiobooks have come a long way and they are so good.
I love the reader for The Art of Breaking Things.
Mhm.
I started crying when I heard her narrating my book. So yeah, for sure, audiobooks. I totally agree with that. And I hope I don't make any educators upset, but for me, I have often found that the books assigned in school are almost easier for me to understand through audio. The really sort of like dense classics.
Mhm.
When I hear them, it's easier for me to really get the full story for some reason that I can't quite put my finger on. Maybe it's because we're supposed to hear stories. I don't know. But I also agree with what Kathleen said about, like, sometimes I just need to put my phone in another room, because I'll be on my phone and realize, oh, I could have been reading for this whole half an hour. That I've been looking at Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is. So sometimes I just need to put the distractions in another space.
Yeah. And audiobooks, I met a student last week for a class visit, and he was reading one of my books, but he was listening to it on audiobook because in a sensory sense, it's easier for him to do that than he doesn't like the feel of pages in his hand, and it feels bulky and heavy, and like hardbacks, they have those sharp corners, and it's better for him. And I think that more kids should have that option to do the reading with audiobooks, because I think it's just fine. Lots of people have different ways, just like you have different ways of writing, people have different ways of reading.
Yeah. I think educators would be okay with those answers. So. And actually, I think chores aren't as bad anymore now, because now I can distract myself while I'm washing the dishes, right? Okay, we just have a few minutes left. A lot of teens always like to ask, what would you want if this were a TV show or a movie? And I'm going to extend that question a little bit. I remember the author Cody Keplinger once said, a book getting turned into a TV or movie is kind of like a form of fan fiction. Not everything is going to be the same. They're able to take certain allowances. But if these two particular books were going to be a TV show or a movie, what would you want to come through in the end? Characters would change, I'm sure, or situations, but what would you want to definitely come through? Laura, what do you think?
For me, I definitely want the art to come through, the relationship with Ben, because that for sure was something that is making you turn the pages. That kind of friends to lovers, will they, won't they question. And like, without a doubt, the sense of revelation that she has about, her own self-worth, and being able to speak her truth.
Yeah.
I think that is such a great question, because I've often thought about that. Like, what if they made, How to Make Friends with the Dark into a movie or a TV series? And it would be fan fiction, because at that point, it's not the writer's vision anymore. It's the director's vision, and maybe that screenwriter, and things have to change because the medium would be changing. And I guess the one thing I would like to see come through is just that sense of family is where you find it. And when you find that family, you can make it through, like Tiger says, you can make it doable. And I would hope that they would treat the process of grief and mourning like very respectfully, particularly for younger watchers.
Yeah. And we see in your book, Kathleen, so many little family pockets, throughout the book. And little Leonard, he got to me, and something that he says, or is it Theodore, I'm thinking in the book, say that all superheroes were sad kids. The sadness made them strong, and then they rose up and helped people. And I just loved that line, because when you think of superheroes, you think of them in their superhero form, but you're right. They come
They
from
were.
a sad background.
They all, like all superheroes, had a trauma of some
Mhm.
sort in their childhood, and somehow this led to them being the people that they became, with this power to help other people. And I find that amazing. And I loved writing Thaddeus and Leonard's relationship. And I
yeah.
loved, when we were talking about secondary characters, I loved writing Thaddeus because I knew exactly what his arc was going to be, and I knew exactly how he was going to deal with his past of abuse. And I knew exactly that as soon as he turned 18 and got a job, he was gonna try to adopt Leonard,
Mhm.
because Leonard was his brother. So that's,
Mhm.
I mean, and I love that.
Yeah. And there's so many facets to the foster care system, and we got to see so many different views of that in your book too, which was really powerful as well. Well, thank you both so much. Gosh, that hour flew by. I loved every second of it. And it was, we were talking about heavy topics, but it was a joy to talk about them nonetheless. And it's really important. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for sharing your stories and for helping your readers explore through your books.
Thank you for having
Thank you
us.
so much
Yeah,
for
I
having
agree.
us.
That was an absolutely fantastic panel. Thank you, authors, and our moderator for participating. Kathleen, Laura, Julia, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and all of your attention and dedication today. Lastly, audience, thank you for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed yourself. And please don't forget to vote for your favorite Rosewater title on this year's list. Voting is online at rosiebookaward.com. That's ROSIE bookaward.com. To vote, you just click on the tab at the top of the page, and then you click on the blue words that say vote here. Today was only the first of 8 author panels we have scheduled throughout the school year of 2021-2022. You can see the complete list on the festival website. Our next panel will be in November on the 4th, and it features Allison Gervais and the Rosewater title, The Silence Between Us. Educators, don't forget that you can access today's session after the fact. If you go to the festival YouTube channel, you can use these videos in your classes or with your patrons in your library at your leisure, at your schedule, whatever is convenient for you. And so everyone, please be safe, stay healthy, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. Thank you so much.